just me waiting. I think that's one person waiting. There we go. All right. Do 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 do. All right. So, any questions from you before we start? All right. So we finished with Alexander last time. Yeah, despite. Oh, we have. You did make it today. Hey, thought we weren't gonna see y'all today.
I know, we thought that too, but apparently they canceled all those games, so we're good.
Oh, okay.
We were very excited. We
Oh.
did not leave those games.
Fair enough. Just have to leave a little bit early. That's fine. I'm glad y'all made it at all. I mean, we might be done early, to be perfectly honest. It might work out. Will y'all be able to make it on Wednesday?
Yes.
Okay. Because that is review day, and I'm.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Good. All right. So, any questions for you guys? Oh, good. All right. So we ended last time with Alexander. Again, I mean, he was like 30. Returned from Babylonia, planning to invade Arabia. Like, he was at the top of his game, and then he drank himself to death. And it just changed the course of everything. The Macedonian generals were like, all right, well, Alexander's not here. We're not going to mess with any more conquering. We've got to keep what we've got, and just really tidy up is probably the best way to put it, and that's what the next few pages are going to be. So there's the best image I could find for the death of Alexander. So the Hellenistic kingdoms, as they were called, the Greek-like kingdoms, which will be what Rome will be dealing with in the next few chapters. So after Alexander died, his kingdom broke up, or his empire broke up into its component parts, ruled by either his generals or the governors that had been appointed to them before he died. Alexander's wife, Roxanne, delivered a boy, named him Alexander after Alexander died. However, both of them were murdered by order of Cassander, not the ruler of Macedonia, because nobody wanted another Alexander. So, baby murder was just part of the political order of the day back then. It's like, nope, we don't want another one, just, no. A very similar thing happens, like 2,000 years later, in France, when Napoleon steps down. It's like, well, my son can take over, and the rest of Europe's like, no, you're going into exile. Your son, they don't kill his son, at least. But they're like, no, your son's just going to go off and live a normal freaking life. We're not dealing with it. Napoleon's like nephew tries to do a thing later, but his son like never comes up again. So here we have, this was the extent of Alexander's conquest. So again, this is what we've been talking about the whole previous chapter, is just like this little bit of Greece. Well, maybe this little bit over here too, because this whole like Aegean Sea region. And then Egypt down, well, sorry, Egypt's here. This is Carthage. Egypt's down here. And you know, this area over here, kind of the Middle East. And if you really want to go far back, you know, Mesopotamia. But that was about it. And then Persia shows up, and they're, you know, all of this. And then Alexander comes out of here. Well, technically Philip took Greece. And then Alexander's just like, we're just going to take all of this. Just the whole thing. And he was planning on taking Arabia. He was planning on going further to the west and taking Carthage as well, which isn't a thing until, like, Rome. He was probably planning on going further into India as well, but again, he, you know, drank himself to death. Yeah, it was a whole thing. So, let's discuss each of the three major groups here. I'll point them out on this map real quick before we discuss them. So there's the Kingdom of Greater Greece, which was Greece and like Macedonia. I think it also included a little bit of this over here, but it's mostly just Greece and Macedonia. I think, you know, then the cities over this way. Then there's the Seleucid Kingdom. No, wait, sorry, the Kingdom of Egypt, the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. So it's, well, Egypt. But specifically it's Egypt ruled by the Greeks. So it's a very Greek Egypt. I mean, obviously the Egyptians still live there, but it's ruled by Alexandria. It's ruled by, you know, Greek rulers, which is why by the time we get to Cleopatra, she's more Greek than Egyptian. And the rest of it, all of this, is the Seleucid Kingdom, ruled by, well, Seleucus, but we'll get to that later. So basically Persia is the rest of it. So, the Kingdom of Greater Greece. It was really the hardest to keep in control because it's freaking Greece. As we've seen the entire previous chapter, there was constant infighting. I mean, even after being conquered by Philip and then, like, reconquered by Alexander, it's still Greece. The Greeks are not going to just take it. Now, granted, they did sort of have to just take it, but they were still, you know, causing rumbles, which we'll see even as far into the future as Rome. As I said, it included Macedonia, because technically the Macedonians were Greek-ish. They spoke Greek, but it was like a dialect of Greek that the Athenians couldn't really understand. It was temporarily ruled by a bunch of different people. Eventually, Antigonus, the one-eyed, took over the whole region and ruled it after 319. So, for the sake of 3 easy multiple-choice questions, just remember who ended up ruling each region. So, Antigonus ended up ruling Greece. And I bet it, well, I was going to say, I bet it wouldn't be too hard to pick him out of a lineup considering his name, but I imagine he wasn't the only one-eyed guy in Greece. considering what Philip looked like. Next we have Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy the First. And then he had like a dynasty, and most of the male rulers were Ptolemy the whatever. Again, this eventually led to, Cleopatra and whatnot, which again, she was more Greek than Egyptian. This was largely the easiest to maintain because, well, Egypt had been around for, at this point, several thousand years already. It was already very ordered, had lots of resources. Alexandria was still largely in the process of being built, but it was going to be like the center of commerce and culture for hundreds of years. And out of these three Hellenistic kingdoms, it would stick around the longest. Now, eventually, like, as a Hellenistic kingdom, it would fall, but, Egypt itself would stick around as at least a cultural thing. I mean, obviously, Egypt itself still exists, but not as like an unbroken line. So, again, obviously, Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, Ptolemy ends up running it. When you see the word just at first, it's like, wow, that's horrible. Then you realize, oh, wait, P's are often silent. So, Ptolemy. And then finally, we have the Seleucid Kingdom. Seleucus the First, one of Alexander's commanders, seized Babylon, and by 303 controlled most of what is essentially Persia. So he kind of took it by force. Now, I say kind of because, like, he wasn't really fighting a unified Persia anymore. But it wasn't like he was granted it like Ptolemy was. Now, while his region was the largest by far, it was also very unstable. And very early on, pieces of it began to fall away. Like on the borders of the Seleucid Kingdom, it was pretty easy for regions just to like stop listening to royal authority and more or less declare independence because it took so long for the Seleucid authority to do anything, and so they could essentially just sort of do their own thing, or for some outside force to take them over, and the Seleucid authority didn't have the energy or manpower to control all that land. And the other two Hellenistic kingdoms would often like take land from the Seleucid kingdom. So despite all three of them being Hellenistic kingdoms from, Alexander's empire, they didn't always work together. In fact, well, I wouldn't say they were like immediately at war with each other, but they were pretty much immediately rivals. So there are parts outside of the main Hellenistic kingdoms that existed, and some were controlled by Greek or Greek-like, just to say, Hellenistic rulers. And page 90, again, if those of you that get your hands on the books, shows this really interesting Greek-like coin used as far east as Western India, centuries after Alexander's empire collapsed. Which is to say, even though Alexander's empire didn't spread into India, the culture kind of like through osmosis spread into at least the western section of India. And this idea of a two-sided coin with like the head of a ruler on one side and then either like a cultural figure or an animal on the other side was at least seen in the western parts of India, which were the closest to Alexander's kingdom, which again wasn't common in the rest of India, which is something that we see in other parts of at least Europe, and I would say probably the rest of the world too, but I can't speak on that because I haven't taken necessarily like real extensive Far Eastern history courses. But culture spreads beyond conquest, I guess would probably be the best way to say it. You don't have to conquer a region in order to spread your culture. Now, I should have had this coin image right here on this page, but I don't for some reason. I think I probably got it on a later slide, so we'll get to that in a minute. Hellenization, which again is just the spread of Greek language and customs and culture throughout the Hellenistic kingdoms. So Greek was the language of commerce, royalty, and official documents. Now, this was not forced upon the native populations. When Alexander took over, say, Egypt, the Egyptian people were not forced to learn Greek. When he took over Persia, the Persian people were not forced to learn Greek. But if they wanted to become, civil servants, if they wanted to become royal authority, if they wanted to, do any kind of like commerce within the kingdom, big time stuff rather than just like local commerce, they would have to learn Greek because that was the official like big language. And much like what we're going to see with Rome, that wasn't something that was taught to them. They'd have to learn it on their own. And here we are, finally. This is why the Rosetta Stone was created. Because the Rosetta Stone, which I've got an image of here in just a minute. Oh, here's the coins that I meant to show you guys. So here we have, this is a coin from India. On this side we have an Indian elephant. On this side we've got, a dude on a horse. Again, it's clearly not Greek, but it's got a Greek style of being minted. I don't have a picture of the Rosetta Stone. What is the matter with me? Okay, so the Rosetta Stone, it has three very separate fonts on it. So at the top is Egyptian hieroglyphics. In the middle is Egyptian cursive, which is what the regular folks would write with. And then at the bottom was the official Greek. And it was just like a proclamation for, I think, taxes or something. It it wasn't like a huge important thing in terms of what it was actually saying, but it was like not a billboard, but like a bulletin board sort of thing. And because, as I've mentioned in the previous chapter, because Europeans were so like obsessed with ancient Greece, and oh, this was the cradle of our civilization, and blah blah blah. When it was finally discovered by freaking Napoleon in the 1800s, well, late 1700s for Napoleon. That was like 1790, I think. And then it's immediately stolen by the British. And they realized, oh wait, we can read this bottom part. So they just translated upwards, and I'm pretty sure like they had been able to translate Egyptian cursive by that point, so they were able to confirm that the Egyptian cursive said the same thing as the Greek. So it was like, oh, we can just translate straight up, and they were able to translate the hieroglyphics. So that was really neat. Like, it was a huge deal for what was essentially just like a tax code or something. As I said, this wasn't promoted by the Greeks. It was not like big schools to teach people how to read Greek. If you wanted to learn Greek and get ahead, you had to do it on your own. There's another thing in the book, the Camel Trader's Complaint on page 93, where there is, a camel trader that's complaining about how, like, everything's Greek. Well, not everything, but, like, if you want to do anything beyond the local level, you have to learn Greek, and how it's not like the old days, There's always that. So just a quick, like a really quick run over of philosophy. Skeptics doubted all knowledge. Cynics rejected basic conventions and dropped out of normal life. Epicureans, purposeless nature of the universe, simple human pleasures. Stoics engaged the world based on individual virtuous actions. These sort of ideas would stick around during the Roman era and be built upon. You're not necessarily going to need to remember all of this. This is just something that the book went into, and I figured I would at least mention. For example, a lot of the quote good Roman rulers were considered Stoics. They would base their behavior on what was considered virtuous actions, which virtue wasn't not like what we would think today as virtue, but what was considered good for Rome specifically, that sort of thing, which we'll also get into really next chapter after the test. All right. Here's some neat stuff. Technology, science, and medicine. Eratosthenes. He calculated the circumference of the world within a very small margin of error, which is to say, by 300 BC, we knew not only that the world was round, but about how big it was. Which meant that a dude like in 300 BCE, knew better than Columbus, because Columbus thought the world was smaller than it actually was. That's why he thought, hey, let's sail west and we'll get to the east. But, Eratosthenes was like, there'd be a lot of ocean between here and there. Obviously they weren't aware of the American continents, but yeah. Aristarchus of Samos proposed a heliocentric view of the Earth and planets. However, he was not widely known. It wouldn't be until Copernicus that this would actually be more widely published. Which again, like, the way that he kind of figured this was this really wild math that breaks my brain. He's like, oh, well, based on how the sun is moving, it seems like that we're actually moving around the sun due to the angles. And it's like, it looks like a big fireball in the sky, my dude. How are you figuring this stuff out? I mean, like, I get it now because of modern science and technology, but, like, back then, I don't blame people for thinking that the big ball in the sky is going around the planet. That's fine. In Egypt, Ptolemaic scholars were allowed to dissect cadavers, allowing them to be more aware of how the body's internal functions worked, which was something that wasn't allowed again until, well, I shouldn't say it loud, something that wasn't really looked into again until, like, the Enlightenment, and people were robbing graves and cutting into bodies. Now, typically, well, when I say robbing graves, okay, they were still robbing graves, but typically it was like criminals that had just been executed, and then they just, like, dug them back up and started cutting on them. Because around that time it was like, oh, you got to balance the humors, and oh, your blood's bad, let's bleed you until you freaking die anyway. It's weird, the ups and downs of, like, medicine and technology. It's like, they had a pretty good idea of what was going on. Like, 1,500 years later, it's like, why are we not, what happened? Anyway. This was how they figured out the circumference of the Earth. There was a well at Syene that on the summer solstice, the entire bottom of the well would be lit up. So that meant that the sun was directly above it. And on that same day, there was a column at Alexandria that had a certain level of shadow. So based on the distance between the two, it was clear that the sun was not directly above the column of Alexandria at that same time. So they measured the shadow, figured out where the sun was, figured out the distance. I mean, it was only like, well, they used the measurement in the Greek, the stades. Yeah, it's like a few hundred kilometers. But then using that, he figured out the distance of the Earth, which, again, was a little bit off because he was using such a small, like, percentage of the Earth, and it didn't account for, like, mountains and the fact that the Earth isn't actually a perfect sphere. It's an oblate spheroid. It's kind of squished. No, is it? Which way is it squished? It's squished in the middle, and it kind of, like, sticks out in the top and bottom just a little bit. But yeah. Point being, he was close enough to be, I would consider it right. There is Aristarchus measuring the relative distance from the Earth to the Moon and to the Sun, which, like, again, I don't understand how he figured this stuff out, but good on him. This is beyond me. Like, I took trigonometry and stuff, but I don't know where in the world this man got these values. I mean, how do you eyeball this stuff? especially for a thing you're not supposed to eyeball. Okay. Good gracious. All right. So again, as I mentioned with Alexander, there was a lot of mixing of religions with the Greeks because, for the most part, the Greeks saw other polytheistic religions as just versions of their own beliefs. So for the most part, Greek rulers honor native religions because, like, you go into a region and they're like, "Hey, this is our chief god, and this is our god that like does water stuff, and this is our god that does like lightning stuff, and this is our god that does fire stuff." It's like, cool. That one's Zeus, and that one's Poseidon, and that one's Apollo, and yada yada yada. It's like, you just have different names for our dudes, and we're gonna respect that you have different names because we don't really care what you call them. That's fine. Like, we called ours different names for, centuries, and then we just decided to go with different names for reasons. So, whatever. Let's not get into how Dionysus changed. He wasn't always the party god. Yeah. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, there was this veneration of the past. I mean, it's weird to think of like 300 BC looking into the past as like classical Greek. It's like, but you're already so far in the past. So yeah, they're venerating classical Greek literature. Alexandria was this treasure trove of ancient texts. Ptolemy was convinced that books were the best way to know the past, which, it's not entirely wrong. I guess some, archaeologists would disagree with him, but books aren't a bad way of knowing the past. And most of what we know today of really things from pre-Rome are due to Alexandria, despite the fact that Rome freaking burned down Alexandria. But a lot of the collections were able to be saved by the Alexandrian librarians because they knew what they had and they knew to get it the hell out before the whole place burned down. But we would know so much more if Rome didn't burn down Alexandria.
Why'd they burn it down?
Because Rome's full of a bunch of dicks. I think it was specifically Caesar. I think Egypt was trying to rebel, and so they decided they were just going to burn the whole place down, like the whole city, and of course including the library, as like a show of force. It often comes up as like, if you could go into the past and change one thing, most historians are like, this. We would change this. We would stop this from happening. It was like one of the wonders of the ancient world. They had a lighthouse. They had a lighthouse that had a fire in the top, and it had bronze mirrors that would reflect the light like out into the sea to keep ships from, hitting the rocks. They had a freaking like bronze lighthouse. It was so cool. Alexandria was so cool, and here's a rendition of what the library probably looked like. It was built like a temple. It was considered, a temple of knowledge. Also, Ptolemy, I say Ptolemy, but like the people that ran the library, they were serious. Let me go back to this. when you came into the port when it came to the port of Alexandria, which it wasn't just the library, it was a major trading port. So if you came through at all to do any kind of trading, you would come through the port. And when you came through the port, you had to surrender all documents to the library, to be checked. And the scribes in the library would make copies of your documents. And if you happen to have any sort of like rare books or anything on you, you would get the copies back, and they would keep the rare book. Price of admission, rare stuff. You get a copy, but yeah. Now, granted, if you didn't have, anything on you, you just, you get your stuff back. But if you happen to come in with something they don't have, or they only have a couple of copies of, you're getting a copy back. But yeah, it was something else. Speaking of really amazing stuff, was the art of the Hellenistic era. So different from the Athenian art. Rather than being idealized and perfect, it was realistic, it was dynamic, it was full of energy. It was very similar to what we would see so much later with like Baroque art. Portraiture was also very popular. Busts of famous people. It was regional, but still very Greek. So every region had its own, form of art, but it still followed a very Greek style. So the people that had been conquered, despite the fact that, again, Alexander didn't last very long, and as soon as he died, everything broke apart and became sort of its own thing. Like the Seleucid kingdom immediately became more Persian. The Ptolemaic kingdom immediately became more Egyptian, and of course, the kingdom of Greater Greece was still Greek. It wasn't as Greek as it had been because it's under the control of more Macedonia. But they still had this touch of Hellenism, this touch of Greek-like culture. And just to go into some of this art, this is marble. Now, lots of it has been broken over the years because, again, this is extremely old. But, this is, I don't remember the name of the guy. This was, I think the story is that he was going to warn Troy about the subterfuge of the Greeks. So Poseidon had this serpent come out of the sea and grab him and his sons and drag him into the ocean. So what you're seeing here is this dude getting attacked by these serpents, and there was another head here biting him on the neck, and they're getting dragged back into the ocean, and you can see the fear and pain in their faces as they're being attacked, and fighting the serpents. I mean, you can see their muscles under their skin and their hair, and the expressions of their faces. And even the cloth. And speaking of which, oh no, here we go. This one's really good. Because it's just some dude. Now I say it's some dude. This could be Socrates because he was kind of ugly. There is a statue of Socrates in the previous chapter, and he kind of looks like this. Socrates wasn't a very attractive guy. So this could be, I say it's some dude. It could be Socrates. But it's just kind of some dude. But it still has so much detail to it. The way the cloth falls on his legs, Again, the detail of his body. And I'm pretty sure the way this is set, he was probably holding a torch. Like they had him holding a torch, and they would light it, and like he just would stand there and hold a torch. Because again, all of these pieces were painted. They weren't this stark marble. And one more piece, which for some reason I have up there twice, I think. Yes. This is the Wing Victory, or the Wing Nike, because that's what Nike means, is victory. Obviously this piece has seen better days, lost its head, both arms, and a wing, but it's still one of the most magnificent pieces left from this era. Again, it's made out of marble, but look at the cloth. Look at the feathers on the wings. Look at how you can even see through the cloth. You can see, like, her stomach. It's amazing that they could do that. And that's actually it. Philip Alexander united the fractured Greeks, took Egypt, defeated, and then conquered Persia. And while as an empire only lasted as long as Alexander, the Hellenistic kingdom still spread Greek ideas to the Near East much further than anyone in Greece, like Athens, would have ever imagined. Again, this goes back to what a class I took in grad school about the Celts, where we think of like Celtic stuff in Ireland, but the Celts never actually settled in Ireland. The Celts were like a mainland Europe thing, but they traded heavily with Ireland, and that culture spread to Ireland. But like the Celts as a people, one of their main cultural things was chariot burials. They were all about chariots. And there's not a single chariot burial so far that's been discovered, but I mean, they've done a lot of digging and like ground penetrating other things. Not a single chariot burial in Ireland. But there's all sorts of like artifacts and cultural stuff in Ireland, and that was just like the culture spreading. So similar to that, you have a lot of this, and again, it's very similar all over the world, of the culture spreading beyond the actual people. So that's that. We're done very early today. But not early enough that I would say, let's just go ahead and do the study guide and we'll do the test on Wednesday, because that'll be, I told you we wouldn't do that. So Wednesday, we'll go over the study guide, which should already be on Blackboard. I would suggest for those of you in here to print it out and bring it into class, just so you can follow along. But I mean, if you have it on your digital device, so you can do that too. And we'll just go over it. So just be prepared to answer the questions on the study guide as we go through it. And yeah. Any questions from you guys? All right, be safe going home. I don't know if the rain's picked